Good morning, everybody. It's like last day, so I guess everyone is a bit tired, at least I am. My name is Thomas Maschler, and I'm I'm the GIS manager for the Global Forest Watch Africa at the World Resources Institute. And my colleague here is Sarah Sargent, and she is also a GIS analyst for Global Forest Watch. So at Global Forest Watch, we build a forest monitoring platform which tracks deforestation in close to real time. But besides that, we also try to put this data then into context. So like one of the projects we started recently is the logging road project, where we want to see, okay, how can we link deforestation to logging? So like the closest thing is, of course, like to look at the logging roads to see like how the networks expand and how we can link this then to deforestation. And this is the project I want to talk to you about today. So, but maybe before we start, I want to kind of get a feel like whom I'm talking to. So, like, who of you already has an OpenStreetMap account? Okay, that's good. All the others, please sign up now. Like, who already actually edited data on OpenStreetMap? Okay. And who participated in a mapathon? Okay. And who tried actually analyzing the data? 3. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay. So this talk is more today, not so much a technical talk. It's more about how we are using the tools and what problems we have, like trying to implement our workflows. So like if you have technical questions, we have also Chris here, who's our lead developer, and you can ask him afterwards how we actually did this. And if you're already familiar with all these different workflows, you can go straight ahead to one of our sites, which is tofixloggingroads.org, where you can actually start tagging or like try to help us fixing some of our data. So what we're doing here is timestamping logging roads in OSM, and we try to find the first date that show up on satellite imagery. And like once you found the correct year, you can select that year, and it will write it directly to OpenStreetMap. And if you find it too difficult, because some of the data are pretty poor quality, like to be honest, you just skip it and go to the next one. But let's get started. So my colleague Sarah will tell you a bit more about our motivation behind the project and the general idea, and afterwards I'm going to tell you a bit more about our workflows and the issues we were facing during the rollout.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Sarah, and I'm going to discuss some of the motivation behind the Logging Roads project. So when a lot of people hear about deforestation, especially in rainforests, they immediately think of the Amazon. And the Amazon is experiencing a lot of deforestation. But the deforestation rate in the Amazon region is actually decreasing. But unfortunately, the deforestation rate is rising in the Congo Basin. And logging roads are a major indicator of the deforestation rate in the Congo Basin. And until now, their reach has been really difficult to visualize, and this really obscures the rapid rise in deforestation in the region. So between 2000 and 2013, intact forest landscapes in the Congo region lost nearly 10 million hectares. And intact forest landscapes are forests that have never been disturbed by humans. So these are really important areas because they have high biodiversity, they have endemic species, they serve as a refuge for animals, and they have usually high carbon stock. But they're becoming increasingly rare, and we want to conserve them because once they're cut and deforested, we lose them. And one of the species that calls these intact forest landscapes home are elephants. And between 2002 and 2011, the elephant population decreased by 62%, and they lost 30% of its geographic range. So this is a map looking at intact forest landscapes and the population density of elephants. So intact forest landscapes are here in green, and the population density of elephants is that brown layer behind it. So the darker regions are where we have greater density of elephants, and all the tan regions there and in the east are areas where there are potential for elephants to live, but they've been pushed out by humans. And most of the remaining elephant population lives within these intact forest landscapes. The situation looks even more dire when we look at logging concessions within these intact forest landscapes. So more than 20 million hectares of intact forest landscapes are inside active logging concessions. And active logging concessions mean that the government has granted companies the right to go in and extract trees from these regions. So we can only presume that intact forest landscapes will continue to decline. So given the potential to lose this really important resource, we need to map these roads. And this is a really large project, and previously our group was looking at it on a country-by-country basis, but this became a huge burden to keep up to date. Additionally, similar people were doing the exact same work. So we partnered with Moabi to form the Logging Roads Initiative, and with this huge task, we really hope to expand our network and continue to connect with more people. We also hope that this initiative becomes a call to action for those that are passionate about preserving these really diverse and important landscapes. And through crowdsourcing, we can drastically improve the oversight of environmental activity. And so all of our data within the logging roads is updated and edited within OpenStreetMap, which gives us a geographic database that's built entirely by contributions from the crowd. So you might ask what we need with all this data. A better data, we hope, equals better planning. So we can work with people on the ground in this region to make sure that companies are following the law. We can have better environmental oversight. You can also be more efficient in your planning. So if you know where roads exist currently, you can avoid the first cut into these IFLs by potentially going off of current roads, older roads. We also really want to download this data again and then use it for accessibility maps, suitability maps, and other deforestation prediction models. And then all of this information can then go back to our partners that are working on the ground. So it all sounds good, but I'll let Thomas take it from here.
Yeah, so this sounds good, but how do you actually do this? So at Global Forest Watch, we normally really approach things a bit differently. Like we only have a small group of experts who are working on a data set and then say this is the truth. We have machine learning algorithms and lots of PhDs who really are smart and say, okay, I worked out on this data set and this is what is happening out there. Or if we compile other data sets, it's really handpicked and really processed data, so which went through a thorough validation process. And we normally keep control of everything. So putting something on an open platform is kind of a challenge, and we didn't have this in-house experience or knowledge. Then also on the other hand, WRI is highly sponsored by Esri, and we get all our software for free. So we're all sitting in our office chairs and feeling comfortable. And if something doesn't work, we call the support and say, hey, it's not working. And they say, yeah, it's a bug. And then say, okay, whatever. Then I try to find a workaround, right? But we don't have all the tools in house or experience with tools who actually deal with other data other than just standard GIS data. So when we first looked at OpenStreetMap data, we got a headache, right? So this is somewhere in Cameroon here, and you see these data are pretty inconsistent. So we have some areas where we have really high precision in the data set. We have every footpath is basically mapped, and in other areas nothing is mapped. So it's Like depending where you go, in particular in Africa, like the consistency is pretty inconsistent. Also, the tagging of the data is very different. So the attributes. So in OpenStreetMap tagging, they have quite a good documented tagging scheme and how you should label different objects. But this changes over time and it evolves, and also not everyone is always sticking to these rules. So filtering out and finding the right data set and building all these rules to actually identify the data you need in OpenStreetMap becomes kind of a challenge. This is linked to also the data model. It's not like as a normal JS user, you're used to layers and points, lines, polygons, and then you have specific attributes linked to this. In OpenStreetMap, this is a bit more open. So this reminds more on the coverage or a topology. So you have points, and points are then connected to ways, and points and ways can also form relations. And then you can basically add whatever tag you want to that node, to that way, to that relationship, and then create your objects like this. So it's very flexible, but on the other hand, also very challenging to actually analyze this data. So, as I said, we want to build also a community, and initially we were focusing on Africa, which is the next challenge. The community using OpenStreetMap is basically only exists in Europe and in North America. There's hardly any users or active users which are based in other countries, and the community is basically similar to the participants of this conference. They are mostly white old men, a couple of young motivated women, and all the others are missing, right? So it's like if we actually want to engage with other people, we have to, like in these countries, we actually have to start these communities there and start from scratch, right? Like no one knows OpenStreetMap and no one ever have used it, and they don't know why they should do this. And then there's also kind of a code of conduct in OpenStreetMap, and if you don't follow the rules, people get really angry at you. So like you have to know all these rules first before you actually start engaging with them, and it's not very intuitive. So like you have to read a lot, you have to talk to a lot of people before you actually understand like what you have to do and what you shouldn't do. So how did we do this then actually? Because we had to learn, right? Like we didn't have any experience. So what we did, like we partnered up with Moabi, who's an NGO also based in Washington, DC. And they worked a lot with these kind of data, with this kind of tools, and brought in their experience. And then we pitched this idea of getting all our logging roads into OpenStreetMap also at an EcoHack, which is basically a hackathon around environmental issues, where we then collected additional feedback from other users and crunched out, identified possible workflows and tools. And then once we had this worked out, we then pitched the idea to the OpenStreetMap community. So there are lots of wikis and mailing lists we were interacting with, so we documented everything we wanted to do. We reached out to all the different users who might have concerns, and then collected feedback, adapted our workflow again, and then eventually, in the end, we actually managed to build our tools. So we didn't want to do everything from scratch. We actually found quite a lot of tools which were already out there, which kind of resembled to the workflows and tasks we wanted to perform. But we had to tweak them a little bit. So the workflows we identified resemble a lot to the workflows of the Missing Maps initiative. Although our Missing Maps is, I think it's also by the HOT team, humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, an initiative to fill in gaps in areas where people are in need, and the humanitarian action, the humanitarian teams like Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières want to engage. So they're using these maps to actually do their planning. For us, we're focusing out of these areas. the humanitarian team is mostly focusing around people, whereas we focus around forests, right? There are not many people in the forest, so, there's also not much going on. So normally, like if Red Cross or so on like starts a project, there has been an earthquake, so they can, like they have all these pictures and images in the media, and they can say, hey, there's a crisis, help everyone, like everyone should come and help us to map these areas. Whereas with us, it's like, okay, there's a logging road, and then slowly it's like a creeping disaster, right? But it's creeping, like it's not very visible. So like we can't trigger the same reflexes like from people to engage in our project. So it makes it way harder to actually build this community. However, like we can still like use their tools and their workflows. But then again, like since we're looking at logging roads and OpenStreetMap, no one so far actually defined a model how to document logging roads in OpenStreetMap. So we had to do this, and we had to embed these models then also in the existing tools which are out there. So like OpenStreetMap team brought in a lot of tools. We're using the tasking manager, using the export tool, and then from Mapbox, they made the ID editor, and they also made the ToFix tool, which we then customized and for our needs. And then, of course, like what we had to do is document everything, because we actually want to have a lot of people engage with us and help us mapping these roads. So all the documentation of the workflow and the tools needed to be done too, and then, of course, in all the different kind of languages, since we were not working in an Anglophone area. So afterwards, we started reaching out. So we did lots of mapping parties. We did this in DRC, in Cameroon, and Gabon. We also did this here in the States. And our strategy was that we first identified already GIS professionals who already knew a lot about GIS, so that we didn't have to start from scratch and tell them about mapping and how this works. So, and also hoping that these people pick up and then populate the world and engage with other people and continue like working with these tools and motivate other people to join into it. So we're doing this on a regular basis. We identified some champions in these countries who actually become really drivers of our projects and help out organizing these events. A big challenge there is actually the internet connection. So each time we wanted to organize one of these events, we had to see that we find a sponsor who actually can provide like high-speed internet. We're hoping to bypass this now by having this offline and then sync the data later, but we're not there yet. And then, of course, the main challenge afterwards is like, how can we actually use the data? So as I showed you before, most of the data are pretty inconsistent. So in the beginning, we started with the idea, we map our data in OpenStreetMap, and then we run all these accessibility layers and suitability models and so on. But if I'm going back here, if I try to make an accessibility model based on this data set, my results won't be very good, right? So we have to change plans here, and or change focus and prioritize areas. So we have to like break this down in chunks and say, okay, like which areas are we actually most interested in? And let's first focus on these areas, try that we actually validate the data, like get them like on a constant, like on a constant quality, or like improve the data to a point that we actually can work with them, and then move on to the next area, so that eventually like we cover the entire area, but let's don't do everything at once. So like we had to scale down there a bit, our expectations. But so far this works quite well. So what are our tools? So currently we are doing this, we're campaigning around countries. Eventually we want to get away from this country approach and more go towards topics. So for example, ape habitats, or I don't know, like latest deforestation alerts or something else. So like we want to change this a little bit in the future. But for now, like people can select the area of interest. This will get them to a site, to a tasking manager, where they propose areas where they can actually do some work. They select the area, and then once they selected it, they come to an online editor, and then they can start editing and mapping these roads. And then within the editor, I don't know, this video kind of cut off, something happened during the conversion. Like you can actually find then all the different tags which are related to the logging roads, and then you can add additional attributes, and then you save it, and it's going to be stored in OpenStreetMap. And then in addition, we also have this toFix tool. So this is something more for about data quality. So what we want to do is actually like timestamp every logging road so that we know when it was first created, so that we can link it to a deforestation alert. So what this, like we compiled Lancet data from 2000 to 2014. We have layers for every year. And you can, then users can then flip through the different images and see, okay, like when do I first see the road, and then select the year, and this will be stored to OpenStreetMap. So like this, we can make sure that eventually all our roads are actually timestamped. So what are our results so far? So far, we have quite a detailed data on growth of the logging roads in the Congo Basin. So far, we have more than 30,000 roads which were contributed, and there are like a couple of more like which we hope we can find. So what is next? We're going to continue to build our partnerships. So recently we partnered up with the EU and the Joint Research Institute, and they're going to bring in some extra funding to build out our tools, and we also want to expand to other regions. So like we don't want to get stuck just in the Congo Basin, but we also want to go to Latin America, we want to go to Southeast Asia, see what is going on there. And then we want to make sure that our data are actually up to date. So right now I think our data set stops in 2014, but we actually want to be a bit more ahead of the game, and like once we have all the roads in which were already created, as soon as there's a new road, we want to actually also get it on OpenStreetMap. So on Global Forest Watch, we have this one product which is near real-time deforestation alerts. These are alerts which are published every week. We currently do this for a couple of countries, and eventually we want to scale this up to the entire Pan-tropics. So based on this data set, like here, this is somewhere in Congo right now, you can actually see all the roads quite nicely. So we want to use this data set to then create new tasks and point the users or the OSM users then to these areas to map the latest roads. So we are still looking into different options how we can actually make use of this data set. Ideally, we can actually, like we want to get to the point that we can actually automatically detect if this is a road or not, and then and then create a task. But maybe at the first step, like once until we are there, like we need to have people look at the image first and then tag it, yeah, this is a road, and then create a task. So like there might be some intermediate product in between, but I think this is where it's gonna go. Okay, so like if you want to have read more about what we're doing, please visit our websites. The entire project is also on GitHub, so if you want to contribute to this. And that's it. So if you have questions, please go ahead. And don't forget to evaluate also our session on the FOSS-OG website. Thanks. Any questions? Here we go.
I wonder if you have, if this could be used in the U.S. too. I mean, there's a lot of logging here. Of course, it's regulated and all of that, but I wonder if the public really knows all the clear cutting that's going on in the Pacific Northwest, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You go around, go hiking, you go on in a road, and it's like, oh my God, this is like a desert here in the middle of like a forest. I wonder if people actually know what's going on.
So the question was if we can use these tools also in the US, and the question is yes. So right now, the data we have available, like the workflows work everywhere. It's just currently the data we use to track these logging roads are only available for these countries. So this annual Landsat imagery, we haven't compiled this. We just would need to pull this data together and also include it in our tools, and then you can also use the same workflows in the US. We're actually currently partnering this. We have a partner organization, Global Forest Watch Canada, and they're actually trying this also currently in, I think it's in Alberta. So definitely, yes, you can do this. You can do this anywhere. Yeah.
Do you have any idea of the demographics of the people who actually contribute to these maps?
Mm-hmm.
For instance?
Yeah. So the question was about the demographics, about the contributors for this project. We do know this since we host most of the mapping parties ourselves. So these are mostly nationals in the African countries we're working in, mostly male too, because this is the GIS professionals tend to be male in these countries, and they're also like in the 30 plus. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit how you're trying to connect the data with kind of decision making. Could you go into a little bit more of the examples of like how that was used maybe by the local government or local organizations to actually planning?
So the question was how we link the data to the decision making, especially on the national level or local level. So WI has a lot of projects in these different countries, and we engage closely with the local governments over there. So in the 6 Congo Basin countries, we work directly with the ministries of forest there. So we're using this data to help them do the law enforcement, actually. So like we have all the management plans for all the different concessions, and the way these concessions are organized in this part of the world is that the government leases out an area to a company, and then the company makes a management plan and says, okay, I'm splitting down the area like in equal areas, and each year like in 25 to 30 different parcels, and every year I go in one of these parcels and do the logging there. So like we know where they're supposed to log, and then we can compare these data of the management plan actually like with the road data and see, okay, actually where do you build your roads? Like does this correspond to your management plan or not? And if not, it's quite simple to show them, well, listen, like we have the proof. Please don't do this again. We also work closely together with different conservation organizations, namely WCS, WWF, AWF, and they do a lot of patrols in protected areas. So they work together with the different park agencies and do the law enforcement in there. So knowing where the roads are actually helps them to plan their patrols, because deforestation is not so much an issue there, but it's this defaunification, so poaching, particularly elephants and great apes. So poachers, they also don't like going through the bush. They take the easy road, right? So like if they know where all the different roads are, they can do the patrol planning and just go to the entry points of these roads and just see who's passing by. So like this helps them a lot. And then in addition, we work with the land use planning authorities. So here we can also start, if we already know like where the roads are, we can help them kind of like determine like where the development should go. You know, like, okay, can we reuse existing infrastructure to plan the next road? Which are the areas which are already degraded, you know, like where it's maybe like better to establish like large-scale agriculture instead of like going into the primary forest. So all these kind of questions, for all these kind of questions, we can actually use this data directly and then make better decisions based on the information we have. What are other questions? Okay, great. Thanks for coming.